So while we're waiting for others to join us, if you wouldn't mind dropping your information, like your role in DEI and just a little bit about what you hope to get from the session today into the chat room, that would be great. So if you want, we can go ahead and get started. I mean, there's only a couple of us, but that's not a problem. Okay, let me just get my bearings here on the video call. Okay. So, well, Alnicia, thank you. Am I saying your name correctly? Alnicia?
Alnisha.
I'm sorry?
Alnisha.
Alnicia, thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. And Tiana, I just see Tian. Is that Tiana or Tian? I also see Tian has joined us. So we're going to just get started. This is a really informal session. This kind of came about basically just as a response to some of the things that I've been seeing as we had conversations on Instagram and LinkedIn and the varieties of settings. And it just kind of made me think about how we can begin to do some of this work around DEI a little bit differently than what we've been doing in the past. And so that's just what brought us together today. So while we get started, if I could ask you to just drop your name in the chat box and whatever your role is within DEI or education, and then just a line or two about what you hope to get from today's session or what brought you here. So, and I'm really going to ask for a lot of input because this is just really, like I said, a discussion session for us to brainstorm. So let's see. All right, so one of the first thing that I would say is, let's get started here. So a little bit about my background, so you kind of know where I'm coming from with this conversation. I have been a teacher for 12 years, I'm sorry, for 16 years. I taught at the K-12 level here in Los Angeles. I am here in LA. And I taught with LAUSD for 16 years. I taught language arts, and I did that in a capacity that allowed me to use game design as part of the methods that helped to engage my students. And so I bring a lot of that background with me from education. Prior to teaching, I spent more than about 25 years in corporate America. I worked in various sectors: real estate, groceries, industry, and the largest time was spent in banking and finance. And so I bring a variety of insights from how corporate America responds to some of the things that the changes that we may like to see implemented in our society. And so I leaned on that background as I moved through my teaching career. And in 2020, I received my EDD from USC here in Los Angeles. I did my research and my case study background on anti-Black racism and the awareness of it within teacher education. And within that, I was looking at how do teachers of other teachers, how do teacher educators use that knowledge to prevent anti-Black racism from being proliferated in their classroom settings? How do they navigate around trying to ensure that they are adding that lens to their focus in a multicultural setting, which is what most educational settings are all about? We tend to deal with things more in a diverse mindset, with a mindset on diversity rather than a mindset looking at racism. And so that's one of the areas that, as I'm looking at our conversation today, I wanted to kind of explore what does education offer that may be something that we can blend those two methods of work and those two strategies together. So how can DEI and education find some way of working together to possibly bring some different types of changes? The goal today is simply just to start brainstorming and coming up with as many ideas as we can see as possible starting points of ways to bring leadership into the discussion. I'm going to stop for 1 second to just kind of preface, to kind of give a little background on that, what I think and what I've been seeing as I've been talking to different leaders within from different corporations. I've spent probably the last 2 years talking with a variety of people in corporate settings about the work of trying to honor their commitments to racism awareness. And so with that in mind, today is just about trying to find how do we maybe come up with some starting points that we can offer as a beginning point, and then try to see how we can blend or extend that thought into practice. Any questions or comments so far as we're moving through? No? Okay, so then I started by identifying what I would say is as one of the problems, but for today's session, I think this is what we can focus on as a starting point, and that is that there's a need to bridge the focus of diversity, equity, and inclusion so that it incorporates racism awareness. One of the areas that we see being a challenge, one of the bigger challenges for diversity, equity, inclusion practitioners is the fact that much of the work that is being attempted brings in the racism discussion, and a lot of the leadership is not ready for that. They have different, I think there's a disconnect between what leadership is asking of their DEI practitioners and what they're willing to support. And so one of the goals would be to try to find a way that we can bring about a different starting point that maybe starts with leadership, bringing leadership in for a full buy-in, for them to buy into what's really happening and take an active role in this. Much of what I've been hearing and what people share with me in various conversations has been that the challenge is how to bring their leadership into practice with them. Many say that their leadership has especially at the C-suite level, they have a hands-off approach. And so therefore, when the DEI leader comes to them with suggestions and practices and ideas for change, a lot of that includes a focus on racism, and they are not really, the leader is not necessarily ready to make that stand. So if we could just kind of, I think that's where we're going to start today, with just kind of coming up with some ideas. I'd like to hear some ideas from someone. What are some of the challenges that you really find yourselves dealing with? So if you can either drop it in the chat room for us, and either if you feel like unmuting, I definitely would love to hear your voices. And I'll give you a space to chat. So no one, I do see in the chat that Alnicia says that she's looking to learn other innovative ways to drive impact. I'm glad that you've mentioned that, because one of the key areas that I have been focusing on in my work has been looking at what's called speculative methods. Speculative methods is something that is a practice that comes from the arts world, and it's just now making its transition into educational spaces, and educators are starting now to embrace the fact that we have to look for, like Elnicia used the word, in innovative ways to drive this impact and change. And within that, one of the key things, I'm going to move my screen forward. No, sorry. Speculative methods. I'm sorry, I didn't have my screens together, but the speculative method is an approach that really incorporates and embraces all of the elements of creativity. And so with that, that's kind of where we are today. I think that if we can just kind of brainstorm what is our wildest dream of success within DEI and anti-racism work look like. We start with our wildest dream, then we have the space to bring it back down into, to cull it down into workable solutions. So that's something that one of the key works that I use to help support that is the work of Adrienne Marie Brown. And she wrote the book called Emergent Strategies. And within this book, she really helps us to understand that what we are dealing with in many of these situations, especially as we start looking at racism awareness and how we bring diversity, equity, and inclusion issues into our corporate settings, and really ask for leadership to take a more active role than they have. She brings about a lot of insights that can help us to help leadership understand that it's okay to embrace the unknown. One of the areas that I think many DEI practitioners run up against is the fact that within a corporate setting, the only thing that they look at for information is the stats. They look at what can be measured. And so that's where DEI comes in. Those are all measurable elements. We can measure diversity. We can say how many of each ethnic group or various representation are we hiring. That's easily measurable. We can look at equity issues. Are we implementing procedures and policies that provide an equitable solution for each person to meet them according to their own needs? That's differentiating. That's something that in education, that's a daily practice, that's constant. And that's something that where equity shows up in corporate spaces. Are we meeting the needs of the varieties of our workers? And are we including everyone? Those are all measurable elements. And the one holdout that causes many of the leadership problems is because they're looking for a way to measure racism and racial change. And those are, they're not easy to measure outside of self-reporting in many ways. So these are some of the ways that we could take a look and spend some time, hopefully. And I would love to maybe like bring another session together where we can kind of come out of the square boxes of Zoom and really like have a working session together. But that's something that I think would be important, that we make some space to really explore all of the ideas and the ways that we can bring together some of our various practices, the pedagogy from education and the strategic practices from DEI. Let's see, I'm going to take 1 second and look at the chat box here so I can kind of catch up with what everyone's been saying. So bear with me just 1 second. Let's see. I see that Tiana says we have I'm sorry, am I saying your name right, Tian or Tiana?
It's Tian.
Tian, okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Tian says that we have a very established culture with sets of concepts that undermine DEI, assuming positive intent. Can you tell, and because of that, let's see, she says, because of that, sorry, my box is a little slow. Because of that, the culture is so ingrained in your company's fiber that bringing DEI into the conversation is an uphill battle. Do you want to share a little bit more about your experiences on that, Tiana?
Yeah, I definitely was willing to do that because I know I couldn't really elaborate.
Yeah, definitely. I'd love to hear what you're saying.
Yeah, so there's concepts like assuming positive intent, which how I view that undermines DEI is that puts the person who's being marginalized in a position of being told that they're wrong for the way that they feel, because they need to assume that the oppressor, for lack of a better word, really didn't mean any harm, but it was harmful to them as a person. So, and something else that maybe is a little bit easier to explain is we have something called the mood elevator. I don't know if anybody's heard of it, but it is at the bottom of the mood elevator are things like depressed and anxious, which are literal mental health diagnoses. So employees that have those challenges automatically feel excluded. And this was something, it's been in our corporate DNA for 9 years. And the folks that can help it evolve are not interested in helping it evolve. So that's a challenge for me. Does that clarify?
Yes, definitely. And that is something that we run across quite a bit, because like you said, we have our culture has become so to the point that we don't want to recognize a lot of times when we're harming. Yeah, and I should say those that are in positions to oppress and positions of power often don't want to hear what they're doing and when they're harming. And that's part of the gaslighting that we see in our society right now. It's the idea of when someone tells someone that they've been harmed, it's turning the harm back on them and making them feel like they are wrong for even bringing it up to someone's attention. So in your offices, have you experienced, I would say, how does how does the pushback show up? Is it very much an open? What types of things are you?
We've gotten some employee feedback, without getting into it too much, because I do work for a publicly traded company, so I need to be careful.
Okay.
We have one person, honestly, that leads it and that has a lot of influence over it, who literally told me when I challenged it just last week that I was applying cancel culture to it, which is not it. It needs to evolve. So it's a matter of we need to get leadership to view it differently, to consider viewing it differently. So it's really, honestly, I feel like I'm the one driving it right now because of employee feedback that I've received. But that's really where it lands. And for reference, I'm the only person with a DEI focus at my company of 15,000 people.
So you really are fighting a one-person battle,
Yes. Literally, yeah.
So what are some of the areas, would you say that when we look at this from the idea of a speculative approach, stepping away from some of the strategic and the more formalized, the things that feel formal, how would you say that maybe their reception, do you think they'd be receptive to other approaches that may take it a little bit at a time? And I know that is something that has become an unpopular way of thinking in the work that we're doing with anti-racism and racism awareness and DEI. But honestly, in a situation like this, you're fighting an uphill battle. Means you can't come in with all of the approaches. It's going to have to be a little at a time. And the speculative approach allows for a bit of creativity, stepping outside of the box, stepping outside of the approaches that may be the norm. I tend to find that what is a consistent on pretty much every DEI webinar that I've sat in on and attended, they all start with let's do the vocabulary, let's learn what a microaggression is, let's do these various things. And for one thing that I've understood from that is participants tend to feel, especially if they are not ready to do the work, they feel that right from the beginning, that element of asking them to identify elements within themselves that are, or to just to even identify the language that is used around this type of work, they tend to take offense to it. And what I found is it's not only, but largely when people feel that someone else is coming to them with an imperative, we have to learn these words that go along with the conversation. We have to understand, we have to learn, how to walk certain ways. Yes, that's important, very important. But what we're finding is that when people feel like the choice and the decision is theirs to reach into these steps, then we have a little more buy-in. And I'll give you an example. One of the ways that I really started learning about using speculative methods came with my work with high school students. I taught at a school that says we are a game design school. The small school within the whole larger campus was called a critical design and gaming school. And one of the things that I was challenged with was transform my traditional English language arts class into one that allowed for speculative approaches and creativity and embracing all of the elements of game design. And initially, my students were very, we don't want to do this. This is boring, because first semester was get all of the details about what does it mean to play a game. What is a game? What are all these blank spaces that you start with, and how do you fill them up? How do you bring your imagination along with that? And it was really difficult in the beginning because they had no idea what it felt like to be able to have that type of autonomy in their own learning. And so providing guidelines on, like, here's what we're looking for today, as in what we're doing right now. We're looking for what's a starting point, and understanding that there's no right or wrong, and giving your team and your employees a place to say, here's where we want to start. We know we've got to do this work, okay? But here's where we are, and and here's where we want to start. Maybe we give a variety of starting places. Maybe it's like a map that they have that could give them a little bit of choice. No, I'm not ready to dig into, I have a micro, whether I do microaggressions a lot or whatever. But maybe they're at a point of simply try to even understand why it's necessary. Why do we even have this conversation? So, perhaps maybe that's something that we could use a working session to maybe flesh out what are a variety of ways that we could even just start approaching those people who are so adamant that they don't want to do this work and they don't even feel that they need to do the work. How's that sound? How's that sounding to you?
It sounds good, and I'm constantly going back with different approaches. And we have these things called B statements, and one of them is be curious. Mm-hmm. So since I'm talking to our leader of culture, I'm like, curious. Like I'm intentional in the words that I use to bring it back around to our value set and principles of our culture. So there's some other stuff going on too, as far as resources, staffing and all that just adds to it. Some open director roles. There's a lot of external things that once those gaps are filled, I believe it will help move us forward. So for now, I just kind of go at it from different angles until I influence the right person.
So and another question, I'm curious, what has your response from top leadership been, and what is their level of interaction with the efforts?
The member of senior management that I reporting to during this interim period that we're in, it understands and agrees with me on everything, but is wanting, there's a pause on driving the strategy forward because of some executive leadership roles that are being filled. So I think that there is going to be an appetite for it once we get the people in place. So for now, it's just kind of chipping away. Honestly, I look at it as I'm chipping away for the sake of the employees that are here now and have a different sense of urgency about it.
So I would love to do just like, let's take a little practice on speculating. What is one activity that or approach that you use an activity that we could maybe examine and see how could we change it? How could we offer or expand it? Not necessarily that it doesn't work, but how could it be, maybe how could you approach it differently that may allow for a little bit more, like I said, some of the autonomy. It's that idea of my teacher's not telling me what I have to learn. My teacher gave me the book and said I can pick which chapter I want to read in what order, as long as I finish all of these sections. You see what I'm saying? My teacher gave me this workbook.
Yeah, I do.
So I think that's something that maybe, would you be interested in maybe kind of like seeing how we could change some of those around and make them a little, give user choice, I guess? Build something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm open. Yeah, I mean, I'm open to everything, anything I should say. Yeah, obviously I have some, I'm going to try to control my bias because I know the person that I'm going to go back to this to, and I've probably told myself some stories about based on our previous interactions, but I'm game.
Yeah, would the rest of the group be interested in maybe like spending it at maybe the next time we get together, we spend an hour looking at how we can just brainstorm some ideas and change things around and play with one assignment and see what we come up with, how many different variations of that one activity we can make. That's something that I've had to do as an educator quite often, is make 3 or 4 different variations of the same lesson, because I have some students that may be more visual learners, some that are more tactile, some that prefer to do independent work, some that are more interactive, and they've got to have a group. So a varieties of approaches, maybe we could plan something like that and work through a process of just brainstorming and seeing how we could change that one activity in 1 hour, how many variations we could come up with. That's one of the speculative methods. And I see that Christine also added to the conversation about language, about assuming that the intention is good. Do you want to share some with us, Christine, on that topic? And maybe share how you see the idea about language and intention maybe being brought into this whole idea, this changing of this activity. Maybe we bring in that element.
Yeah, what I heard, Tion, did I say your name right? Wanted to make sure that I'm acknowledging the right pronunciation.
It's Tion, so
Tion.
and own, like you own something. Yeah.
Oh, own.
Tion.
Yeah.
Tion.
Okay.
Tion.
Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate you. No, what I heard her say earlier was that the culture has an intention, assuming positive intention, and there was also the cancel culture. So what I gather from that there is that the leader was not ready to receive or hear what needs to happen, and it was a bit of a force. So for someone who's not open without their listening that's open, it's hard to really hear what responsibility they have in the moment. And because you also mentioned about the culture of curiosity, or the values of curiosity, and that's part of the culture, that instead of like telling them what to do, it's more of like inviting them to go there, so they're like primed to receive what needs to be received and learn what needs to be learned in the moment and do what needs to be done to amend the harm, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I like what you said on that, Christine. That I think you're hitting onto something. That whole idea of them taking the ownership of, number one, of their activities, and then the part of learning how they have caused the harm. Hopefully, what I have found in practice is, once they take that first step and are willing to take their own ownership of learning, then as the information comes through, I think then you open the conversations to adding in how then we can talk about how did we do the harm? How did the microaggression happen? Exploring some of those things that may, for lack of better term, disarm their resistance in a sense, because the one thing we know is we're not going to force someone that's not ready to hear this message. They won't be forced into it, and matter of fact, they will bristle even more. So the challenge and one of the things that I found about using the creative methods is most people don't get upset when you say, hey, let's do something creative together. Even with what I found with creating games with students, even as they chose difficult conversations, because of course I taught was called Writing Games for Social Change. And they had to dig in on topics of teenage pregnancy. They dealt with homelessness, racism, all types of conversations, but it was their choice. And so with that, they were more willing to dig into those tough areas of those topics, even as many of them were dealing with those same issues. I had several students that were homeless at the time, and one of them, may have been the reason they chose that, but it caused them to dig deeper into asking more questions. And I think I heard someone say something about maintaining curiosity. That's exactly what we want to instill and engage our resistant learners with through that that intrinsic questioning, not a question that they are being asked to respond to by someone else, but through their own motivation and their own need for knowledge. That's, I think, the biggest thing that I find, that the speculative approach allows us to do. It allows us to take what has been very strictly defined types of processes and allow us to just kind of throw away the rules and see what happens. The biggest support I think that I can give for that idea of speculating and going with the unknown is we're trying to bring about an equitable society, a society that embraces diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. But we have to consider that we don't really know what that looks like. We've never had a society that fully embraces the concept of diversity, equity, or inclusion. And we know we've never had a society that has embraced or even been anti-racist. We've never lived in a world that doesn't have racism. So we are speculating on what that could look like. And I think that's the work that may be required right now in order to help us move forward. So the speculative methods, the whole idea of throw the rules out the window, I'm all about that. Throw away those rules. We got to start differently. We got to find new ways of doing it. And if it means tearing down the approaches that we use, so be it, because we're actually asking the system to be dismantled and start over again. So our approaches may need to have that same revamping, so to speak. And that's what I'm hoping to just kind of bring together, a group of people that are ready to roll up our sleeves and put on our little creative hats and whatever they may look like, and help us throw away those rules that have been preventing us from finding new ways of reaching those people that don't want to be reached. Comments, questions? I feel like I've been doing a lot of talking, and I really want to hear what some of you have on your minds. I would love to hear some thoughts about this whole concept of speculating. Thank you, Alicia. Thank you for joining us. Glad to have you today. Anyone else? Okay, I'm gonna move the slide. I want to take a look at. Here's a question. So, what might different look like? That's one of the questions that I wanted to kind of ask you guys. What might different look like in your work and some of your approaches? You can drop it in the chat box, or feel free to open your mic and speak. Let's take a look at, here's another question that I have on the slide, and I just put together some questions. I did not want this to be formal. I wanted this to be really whatever our flow kind of goes with. So here's another question. What different types of supports and structures or practices can help DEI practitioners bring their leadership into direct practice? And maybe I'm going to clarify that one because I'm going to say this a different way. How can we find different types of supports and structures to bring our leadership in? And you can type it in the chat box. Any ideas that you may have? These are things that we could actually talk about and begin, that I think we can possibly work on maybe the next time we meet. Okay, nothing on that question. Not pulling anything. Oops. Oh. No. So we've got a few of the questions. Okay. Kind of seems like we may have kind of run our course on conversations. What I would love to do is definitely see if we could set up another time and maybe specifically use that time for digging in and really maybe approaching a specific, taking that one challenge and, like I said, maybe seeing how we could come up with several different ways of using that one activity that Tion mentioned to us. So is that something we're interested in? I will definitely set that up again, set that up for another talk. Awesome, I see some thumbs up. So since it looks like we're just about 10 minutes before the hour, and so are there any other questions, comments, concerns, things that anyone would love to see us talk about or approach in maybe another session? I'm thinking possibly another couple of weeks, maybe 2 weeks, we put together another one of the chat sessions and we come together with some of the topics that you want to talk about or speculate on. Okay, no comments. That's fine. That's great. I know it's kind of hard to come up with some quick thoughts right now, but what I would love to do, drop me a message in the DEI offload connection, the message box. By the way, I saw that Dr. Sam joined us. Dr. Sam, thank you so much for joining us today. And thank you for providing the space for us to kind of work our way through these challenges that we have with working with our clients and trying to help move forward this work of DEI and anti-racism. So with that, I am going to say I appreciate you so much, everyone that joined in today. Thank you for your thoughts. Thank you for your engagement. And as I said, drop me a line on the DEI chat box message board, and we can see about what other areas you may want to spend some time working, and we can just try to maybe come up with 2 or 3 or even 4 variations of whatever activities and approaches you're currently using. We can see how we can expand those lines, and maybe even erase the lines if we, that are confining some of our approaches. So I appreciate you and thank you very much for joining me, and have a great rest of your day and enjoy your weekend. Be well. Thank you. Hi, Ethiopia. How are you? How you
I'm doing
doing?
okay. I'm